2025 was not an ordinary year. For many, it was a year that seemed like prophecies were slowly coming true. In different parts of the world, chaos followed one after another. If you look at the map, there were almost no safe places left. There was war in Russia, war in Israel, violence in Sudan, in Myanmar, in Thailand, and even in Venezuela. It seemed like every continent had its own fire burning. And above all, you always heard what everyone feared the most: the rumors about nuclear war. But what's surprising is that 2,000 years ago, Jesus already warned us. According to Jesus, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation. And it seems like that's exactly what's happening now. But there's a more disturbing part of the story. More and more countries are turning their backs on Israel. It's not just talk, it's clearly visible now. Israel sent ground forces to Lebanon. They exchanged missile fire with Iran and Yemen. There's also tension at the border with Syria. 5 different fronts, but only one center of tension: Jerusalem. There have long been warnings about this. According to the prophet Zechariah, Jerusalem will become a cup of trembling for all nations. All the nations of the earth will gather against her. And when September 2025 came, Israel entered Gaza, an ancient land, formerly the territory of the Philistines by the seashore. And again, something was written about this even before it happened. According to the prophet Zephaniah, the seacoast shall belong to the remnant of the house of Judah. 3 prophecies, 3 events, all happened in the same year. But one thing is clear: this is not the end. The fighting has not yet subsided. In fact, the situation is heating up even more. China is focused on Taiwan, and the relationship between India and Pakistan is becoming dangerous again. And about this, Jesus has an important reminder. According to Jesus, all these are the beginning of birth pains. He did not say this is the end. He said this is just the beginning. What we saw in 2025 is like the first contractions, the first signs before something more painful, major events. And now, there is a question we need to discuss. If what happened in 2025 was already intense, what even greater things will happen in 2026? And most importantly, what does the Bible say will happen next? That's what we're going to find out. But before we start, don't forget to like this video. This means a lot to us content creators. Thank you very much. And now let's get started. Prophecy number 10. By June 2025, what many have feared has come true. According to Zechariah chapter 12, there will come a time when the world can no longer ignore what will happen in Israel. And in that year, that moment arrived. Israel simultaneously launched a massive and intense offensive against Iran, against Gaza, and against Lebanon. But this time, the world's reaction was different. It was no longer just watching from a distance. It was as if countries all said enough at the same time. Responses came one after another. Turkey condemned the action. Iran mobilized. The United Nations called for an immediate investigation. But the most surprising thing was this didn't just happen in government conference rooms. It happened on the streets. From London to Paris to New York, thousands of people came out and called for sanctions against Israel. At this point, it's clear that this is no longer just a simple regional conflict. It's like the whole world against one country. And according to the Bible, this has been written a long time ago. According to what God said in Zechariah 12, I will make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. All the nations of the earth will be gathered against her. All who try to move her will be cut to pieces. A cup that shakes the nations. A cup that throws the leaders off balance. A cup that brings pain, a stimulus to the houses, to shake the peoples, to be a burden to them. A fragile ceasefire was broken, a truce that lasted only a few weeks. Just like that. They didn't care about any barricade. What I saw were women and children. The ground troops advanced. The net in the Rim corridor was captured, and Gaza was literally split in two. Thousands of buildings turned to ashes. Hospitals collapsed. The whole place looked like it was crushed by war. By October, a new hope emerged. On the 10th, the United States managed to mediate a new ceasefire, and Israeli troops withdrew. Humanitarian aid was allowed to enter. The world breathed a sigh of relief for a moment, but it was brief. It lasted only 9 days. On October 19th, the agreement was completely broken. Hamas launched an attack in Rafah. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed, a major who was 26 years old and a sergeant who was only 21 years old. Israel immediately retaliated. Powerful airstrikes were launched. On that same day, 44 Palestinians died. By the middle of the month, the number had reached 96. There were 230 wounded. The Rafah crossing was closed again. Humanitarian aid stopped again. Hamas denied responsibility. Israel accused them of breaking the agreement. And this is when the order came in. Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered a harsher response. And this is also when the world finally reacted, not just with words, but with diplomacy, with United Nations resolutions of condemnation, and with thousands of people holding protests in London, Paris, and New York. What we are witnessing is a modern kind of siege against Israel. This is not just a war of guns and bombs. This is a siege being carried out through the media, politics, and world opinion. In 2025, we began to see countries gradually uniting against Israel. And if this is just the beginning, 2026 might bring the full siege described in the prophecy. But according to the Word of God, what happens next is something that no nation can stop. Prophecy number 9. On October 13, 2025, the world was just one sentence away from total destruction. On that day, Dmitry Medvedev, the right-hand man of Vladimir Putin, issued a warning. It was a warning that literally took the West's breath away. According to Medvedev, if the United States sends Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, we won't bother to think whether they're nuclear or conventional. Our response will match that level. Just one line, but enough to make the whole world tremble. And on that very same day, Vladimir Putin didn't just reject Donald Trump's peace proposal. He did something even more serious. He ordered the deployment of the feared Orekchnik missiles in Belarus. Missiles that are ready to be launched before the end of the year. It's like someone flipped a switch. In just 1 week in October, Russia unleashed hell. There were 84 airstrikes. There were 193 guided bombs. And more than 6,300 Shahed drones were launched all at once. Cities like Kyiv and Kharkiv burned all night long. More than 12,000 homes lost electricity. Some families were buried under rubble while they slept. They never woke up. And if you look at the total number, it's pure slaughter. Around 46,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died. More than 380,000 were wounded, and almost 10,000 tanks were destroyed. But listen carefully. The reason why all of this becomes meaningful in prophecy is not just the war itself, but the atmosphere surrounding it. This is something that Jesus described exactly more than 2,000 years ago. According to Jesus, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, and nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. But there is one line here that is often overlooked. Jesus added the phrase, rumors of wars, and this is the key to understanding our times. Medvedev's nuclear threats, the missiles placed in Belarus, the constant threats to Ukraine. This is not yet the actual nuclear war, but these are the rumors of war. This is the kind of tension that shakes governments. This is the threat that makes people anxious even when nothing is exploding. And it's not just in Ukraine. Tension is also rising in Taiwan as China keeps a close watch. If 2025 brought the world to the edge of a cliff through threats and warnings, all signs point to 2026 as the year when someone, a country, might decide to take the final step. A step that once taken, there's no turning back. Number 8, Ezekiel 38. In July 2025, what happened seemed like a scene from science fiction, but this was not fiction. This seemed like an exact picture of the prophecy in the Bible. Everything exploded on July 2080. From Israel's northern border, the group Hezbollah launched a series of rocket attacks against the Israeli city of Kiryat Shmona. Israel responded quickly, like lightning. In just 5 days, the whole world was stunned. This was no ordinary war. This was a war powered by artificial intelligence. Israel deployed autonomous weapons, weapons capable of making decisions and attacking with almost no direct human control. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out. Secret tunnels were destroyed. Tunnels that stretch up to 10 kilometers long, the very veins where missiles flow. Hezbollah retaliated, not through a traditional army, but through suicide drone swarms, all made using Iranian technology. The result, it's like the end of the world. Beirut plunged into darkness. Over 200,000 people were forced to flee, and the Lebanese government completely collapsed. But this is where the story gets even more terrifying. There are two important details that can't be ignored. First, the attack came from the north. Second, it was powered by Iranian technology. And this is where the long-standing warning of the Bible comes in. More than 2,600 years have passed. The prophet Ezekiel wrote these words. According to Ezekiel, son of man, set your face against Gog. Behold, I am against you. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, the house of Togarmah from the far north and all its troops. You will notice the details are very clear. Ezekiel mentioned the far north. Directly north of Israel, you will find Lebanon and Syria, the region of the ancient house of Togarmah. He also mentioned Persia, and now we know what Persia is. It is the country we know as Iran. And it was exactly Iran that provided the drone technology used in the attacks that came from the north. So what we witnessed in 2025, where Hezbollah acted as an armed proxy of Iran on Israel's border, was not just another regional conflict. This is the gradual formation of what is called the Gog and Magog coalition, unfolding right before our eyes in real time. And as the tensions among these countries continue to rise, the stage is clearly set for a wider and more dangerous war, an explosion that could happen in 2026. Number 7, Revelation 8. In January 2025, firefighters in Los Angeles witnessed scenes that seemed straight out of a nightmare. There were vehicles melting right in the middle of the road. Metal was dripping like hot candle wax. On January 7, everyone thought it was just a windy day. But within a few hours, the wind turned into fire, fueled by the Santa Ana winds. There were gusts that went over 60 miles per hour. 3 fires broke out at the same time: the Palisades, the Eaton, and the Sunset fires. This wasn't an ordinary wildfire. The heat was so intense that the fire itself created its own weather. There were flame storms that reached up to 100 feet high, columns of fire that seemed to climb into the sky. What it left behind was total devastation. More than 150,000 acres were burned to ashes. Nearly 18,000 buildings were destroyed. And more than 500,000 people were forced to evacuate from places like Malamutin. The damage was estimated to reach $53 billion. This was recorded as the most expensive natural disaster in the world in 2025. But what's truly terrifying isn't just the numbers, it's the color of the sky. At night, the smoke and fire painted the horizon a deep red, a red that looked like blood, as ash kept falling non-stop over the entire city like endless rain. If you only read the news, you would see this as a tragedy. But if you read the Bible, you would see a prophecy. According to Revelation chapter 8, when the first angel sounded the trumpet, according to what Apostle John wrote, there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. 1/3 of the earth was burned up. The connection is chilling. The prophecy mentioned fire and ice mixed with blood. And what was seen in Los Angeles? A sky that seemed to be stained with blood because of the fire, and a strange phenomenon called dry lightning, a real rain of fire from the sky. But a question keeps coming back. Why there? Why Los Angeles? For many decades, this city has been the main source of things condemned by the scriptures. Not just entertainment, but influence, violence being normalized, witchcraft and Satanism disguised as family fun, a city often called the pornography capital of the world. And for many, there was an event in 2025 that was the last straw. The passing of laws allowing abortion up to the very moment of birth. For them, that was the moment when it seemed like the city had signed its own sentence. And if this is what the first angel brought, the whole world should tremble at the thought of what will happen when the second and third trumpets sound. In 2026, number 6, Isaiah 17. Damascus is not just any city. This is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. It has stood for more than 11,000 years. It has survived the fall of empires, invasions by armies, and powerful earthquakes. But according to the Bible, the day will come when even this city will fall. A serious warning was written about Damascus. According to the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 17, Damascus will no longer be a city but will become a heap of ruins. For a long time, this seemed impossible to happen. But now, events are gradually aligning with that warning. After the fall of Bashar al-Assad in 2024 and the rise of the radical Ahmed al-Shara, Syria has become like a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. And the spark ignited on July 11, 2025. A violent clash broke out between Druze and Bedouin militias. In just 4 days, the death toll reached 250. But the real turning point came on July 16. On that day, Israel crossed a line it had long avoided. Tired of the endless chaos on its northern border, Israel no longer issued another warning or diplomatic statement. They launched a direct attack. A direct airstrike was launched at the very heart of the Syrian capital. Missiles hit the Ministry of Defense and areas very close to the presidential palace. Think about that. These are not targets outside the city. These are not on the edge or outskirts. This is fire that struck at the very center of power. And according to an Israeli minister, the message is clear. According to him, the era of warnings is over. In recent years, Israel has attacked Syria several times, claiming it was to protect the Druze population. Not only that, they also warned that they would launch more strikes if civilians are not protected. At this point, the direction is clear. All signs seem to point to the moment when Damascus will cease to be a city and become exactly what the prophet said, a heap of ruins. Government buildings were destroyed. The United Nations called what happened a reckless escalation. And an ancient city that for thousands of years has survived everything is now, for the first time, truly hanging on the edge. What we have witnessed is not yet fully fulfilled. But for many, this feels like a dress rehearsal. Damascus is now caught between two fires, an internal turmoil that is slowly tearing it apart from within, and an external threat that is descending from the sky. And between those two, an ancient city is slowly being depleted. Prophecy 5, Revelation 6. There are videos coming out of Sudan that are almost impossible for anyone to watch. Civilians are being forced to eat grass not because they want to, but because that's the only way to stay alive. And this is where the story starts to become even more horrifying. Because for many, what is happening in Sudan now may be connected to one of the horsemen of the apocalypse that Apostle John saw in his vision. The civil war in Sudan has been raging for years. It has left nothing but ruins, hunger, and desperation. The Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces continue to fight. And between them, it is the ordinary people who are being crushed. Cities like Khartoum and Sennar are almost unrecognizable. The main hospital in Sennar has been destroyed, leaving thousands of people with no access to medical care. And when you look at the numbers, the picture is grim. More than 150,000 civilians have died. More than 10 million people have been forced to flee their homes. And around 25 million people now rely on small food rations every day just to survive. Every day, children die because of malnutrition. And the United Nations has made this official. This is now the most severe humanitarian crisis in the world today. But among all those statistics, there is one detail that truly chills the blood. In Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, the price of wheat has increased by 300%. A simple piece of bread now costs as much as an entire day's wage. Think about that. You work all day just to be able to buy a single piece of bread. And this is where what was written in the Bible more than 2,000 years ago comes back. According to Apostle John in Revelation chapter 6, and I looked, and behold, a black horse. He who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice saying, a quart of wheat for a day's wages, a denarius. That's an important detail. The coin mentioned in the original text, the denarius, is exactly equivalent to a worker's wages for a full day's work. The rider of the black horse in Revelation 6 is the rider of famine. And the scales in his hand are not a symbol of justice. This is a symbol of severe rationing, little food, extremely high prices, and the price being demanded, a whole day's work for a day's worth of food, is exactly the scene we're seeing now in Sudan. And here we arrive at a serious conclusion. If the black horse seems to be running already, it means the other horsemen might not be far behind. Number 4, Timo T3. In February 2025, a video from Myanmar went viral online, and anyone who saw it could hardly believe what they witnessed. You can see the soldiers being fired upon. The unarmed civilians were right in the middle of a market. While the shooting was happening, you could hear insults being shouted. And even more horrifying, there was laughter. This was not an accident. This was not a wrong order. This was violence committed for their own amusement. At this point, it's clear that what's happening in Myanmar is no longer just a civil war. It has become a complete descent into madness. The military junta, which controls only about 20% of the country, is retaliating with violence that shows not even a trace of mercy. According to United Nations documentation, more than 1,000 airstrikes have already been carried out. Schools are being burned. Hospitals are being hit by incendiary bombs. More than 3 million people have been forced to flee into the forests. No food, no shelter, no protection. But the real nightmare doesn't just come from the bombs. There are reports of torture chambers using electric shock. There are gang rapes being used as a weapon of fear. There are public executions, even of children. And there are Buddhist temples being destroyed and turned into military bases. With this level of cruelty, political analysis is no longer enough. But the Bible offers an explanation that goes straight to the root of the problem. According to Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 3, in the last days, perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves without natural affection, unforgiving, brutal, despisers of good. There is a phrase here that is the key to everything, without natural affection. This means that the most basic feeling of compassion is gone. The natural emotion that stops us from hurting the weak. The instinct that commands us to protect the innocent. When a person can laugh while someone is being killed in front of him, when power is more important than the life of a child, this is no longer a simple political conflict. These are the perilous times that Apostle Paul foresaw in the future. And if 2025 showed the death of empathy, 2026 signals an even deeper spiritual darkness. Number 3, Joel 2. If you thought the cruelty of man in war was already enough, something happened on March 28, 2025 that showed even nature seemed to join in. At 9:43 in the morning, while the country was already bleeding because of the civil war, the ground suddenly rumbled. A very strong earthquake, 7.7 magnitude, struck near Mandalay. This was not a simple tremor, it was total destruction. The ground split apart. The historic buildings collapsed like paper, and in just a few minutes, heavy casualties emerged. More than 45,500 people died. Almost 30,000 homes were reduced to rubble. And the total damage reached $12 billion. But the most shocking thing was not the earthquake itself, but what followed after. When the buildings collapsed, gas lines and electrical cables were cut. The old wooden houses turned into torches. Huge fires engulfed the center. And for many days, columns of black smoke rose into the sky, clearly visible from far away. The smoke was so thick that it almost covered the sun in a country that had long been living in darkness because of war. Here, the prophecy stops being a symbol and becomes a literal account of what happened. It has been a long time since the prophet Joel gave his warning. According to Joel, I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. He mentioned 3 significant signs, and in Myanmar, all of those happened in a single day. First, blood, the blood that flowed from the thousands of victims of the earthquake. Second, fire, the fire that could not be stopped from consuming the entire city. Third, columns of smoke, thick pillars of smoke in the sky that darkened everything. The people trapped between the bombs of war and the fire erupting from the ground had no idea that they were still alive. Within a single paragraph of the Bible, Myanmar in 2025 became the exact scene of the judgments described by Joel. It was a simultaneous occurrence of disasters, like a very loud alarm, a warning. By 2026, the prophecy clock is about to strike midnight. Number 2, Luke 21. On March 12, 2025, the eastern coast of Australia suddenly changed. The former paradise turned into a scene straight out of Revelation. The reason? Cyclone Alfred, a Category 4 monster. It didn't just bring winds reaching up to 140 miles per hour. It brought the sea with it, a 26-foot wall of water crashing onto the shore. In just a few hours, the streets of Townsville turned into rivers 10 feet deep. In Sydney, the Hawkesbury River rose by 43 feet. Cars, animals, and entire houses were swept away. It was the worst flooding in 50 years. But there was one scene that truly shook the entire nation. In Cairns, the flooding was so severe that crocodiles were forced out of their habitats and swam right through residential streets. Seen in the middle of the debris, all of Australia came to a standstill. A wealthy and powerful country was forced to declare a national emergency and ask for help from New Zealand and the United States. The world watched as a Western power was literally almost drowned. And there was one detail that the survivors repeatedly mentioned. They said the sound of the waves wasn't like water, but like continuous thunder, a loud, deafening roar. And that's exactly the word Jesus used. According to Jesus in Luke chapter 21, there will be signs on the earth, distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. 2 things became clearly evident. First, the sea and the waves roaring. The witnesses didn't use any other word. The sea really roared as it swallowed the shore. Second, distress of nations with perplexity. We saw a modern government that couldn't do anything, confused and overwhelmed by the wrath of nature. What happened with Cyclone Alfred was not just a weather event. This is the Bible happening in real time. And now there's a question that shouldn't be ignored. If in 2025 only one coastline has grown so far, how many more coastlines around the world will echo in 2026 when the signs become even stronger before the return of our King? Number 1, Revelation 16. On May 22, 2025, a sound of clashing metal in the South China Sea alerted the whole world. This was not an accidental collision. It was a deliberate act. A Chinese vessel deliberately rammed into a Philippine boat. But this was not a single incident. What China did was a response to what happened a few days before that. Between April and May 2025, the United States and the Philippines conducted Operation Balikatan, a large-scale military exercise with 14,000 troops, anti-ship missiles, and joint patrols together with Japan and Australia. For military analysts, this is a battle for control of the seas. But for those who study biblical prophecy, this is preparation for Armageddon. And this is where a surprising detail comes in. The Bible has long described the final movements of armies from Asia with exact clarity. According to Revelation 16, as written by Apostle John, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Let's take a closer look at this. The text says that a barrier will be removed, a river will be dried up to provide a clear path for the kings from the east. During biblical times, the Euphrates River was the physical barrier that prevented empires from the east. But in our time, the barrier is not a river. It is the strategic sea routes that have long been controlled by the West. And that's exactly what China is doing now by aggressively securing the South China Sea and openly challenging the Western powers. It is gradually drying up the river. As the modern king of the East, China is clearing its own path. It is securing the routes needed to move troops and resources toward a bigger conflict. That's why the military exercises and clashes in 2025 are not just minor skirmishes. This is a prophecy unfolding right before our eyes. The path is slowly opening. The route is opening, and everything is being prepared for the movement of the kings from the east in 2026. If 2025 is a year of chaos, 2026 could be even worse. Many believe that we may be entering the darkest 7 years in human history, the Great Tribulation. 7 years of control, 7 years of collapse, 7 years of the emergence of the mark of the beast. Why 2026? Because of what some call God's mathematics, according to Apostle Peter, with the Lord, 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like 1 day. The world was created in 6 days, and the seventh was a day of rest. If this pattern is applied to history, 4,000 years, 4 days, from Adam to Jesus. 2,000 years, 2 days, from Jesus until now. That is 6,000 years. This means we are already in the last minute of this. The cosmic clock is about to strike, signaling the end of the age of man and the beginning of the seventh millennium, the kingdom of Christ. And almost all biblical timelines point to a countdown that will end between 2025 and 2030. But there's still one last piece of the puzzle, and it has names: China, Russia, Iran. These three did not unite by coincidence. They form a modern prophetic axis, an alliance feared by analysts but long written about in the Bible. Ezekiel mentioned the north. Revelation mentioned the kings of the east. Many experts believe that 2026 could be the year of open war for this alliance. And when that happens, another prophecy will be fulfilled in real time.